Well, Mr. President, it's a real honor to have you here and to meet with you. I really appreciate you giving us the time for this interview. I've got a lot of questions about this Russia-Africa summit and the kind of cooperation that's been going on and will go on between your country and the Russian Federation, as well as the African continent in general. So, I mean, let's just start with basically talking about the Russia-Africa summit. Were your expectations for what you wanted to come out of this in terms of relations between Eritrea and Russia and the Russian Federation, did it meet your expectations?
I think we'll have to start talking about the context, the historical context. Is this a coincidence? Is it a coincidence between Russia and Eritrea? Russia, Africa? It's not a coincidence, and one needs to talk about the context. I look at it from the historical context. The historical context, almost 30 years now. For me, it's a continuation of one ideology. It's an ideology of slavery. It's an ideology of colonialism. It's an ideology of neocolonialism. It's an ideology, at least in the last 30 years, we can talk about hegemony, controlling. And Russia became a target. Why do we have this ideology changing faces and modifying itself as a virus or any other thing comes to make life difficult for peoples and nations of the whole world? 30 years was an opportunity for those who had this idea entertained in their mind. Because the Cold War was finished by the collapse of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, they felt that was an opportunity, a historic opportunity. Many of their ideologues would say the end of history. So it's the end of history, but the beginning for them to dominate everything. In order to dominate, you have to weaken or perish others, control them. Containment was the name of the game for them. Contain everybody. You will not see anyone your equal in terms of technology, military, economy, name it. And they had to contain everybody, and then 30 years back, Russia was their main threat in their own perspective. So contain Russia. I say now in retrospective, that was a declaration of war. They declared war on everybody. It was not only containing Russia, but dominating the whole world. They classified every region as an influence land or an area for their influence. So to control and hegemonize the whole world, you have to strategize, and the strategy was defining areas as areas of influence for them. To control these areas of influence, you have to have anchors or agents who will promote your ideology. It's a very dangerous way of thinking. And that declaration of war for the last 30 years, particularly against Russia, was there. But it's not limited to Russia. It includes everybody who doesn't bow to this ideology of domination. Now, when we talk about this Russia-Africa summit, you have to look at it from this perspective. It's not a coincidence. We have to look for a new world order. There has to be a world order where law, respect of humans, respect of nations, respect of peoples, and cooperation will have to prevail. Peace will have to be there. They can't continue dominating from slavery to colonialism to neocolonialism to hegemony. How long can people sustain this dangerous ideology destabilizing every part of the world? So I say the Eritrea-Russia or Russia-Africa relationship is not a coincidence. It's a reality that makes this a mission. It's a mission for humanity. Humanity will have to fight for creating a world order that takes everybody out of this jungle. This is a jungle where you have this minority of minorities making life very difficult for everybody. So I say this is not a coincidence. It's not even an option for us to come and work together in solidarity. It's a mission. It's a mission for humanity. It will be inclusive of everybody, Russia, Africa, but also Latin America, Asia. People in Europe and America are also suffering from this dangerous ideology that we have witnessed the last 30 years. I say this last or second summit, Russia-Africa, is in a process. And the process is developing consensus of all these issues, but beyond consensus, we have to clearly define the objectives and goals of the world we want to see. The world order that will have to be there for generations to live in peace, dignity, and work together to make life good for everybody else. How? You'll have to strategize. You'll have to come up with plans, detailed plans, and then mobilize resources and mobilize human resource above anything else so that you make the goals achievable. And I say this second summit is a step ahead. We'll have to go on. There is a lot of work to do. It's an uphill struggle. It's not an easy way. You have so many challenges facing everybody. And above anything else, for Africa, it's unique because Africa is the only marginalized continent that has a population of 1.2 billion now. In a matter of a generation, it will double. And Africa will have to find a better opportunity for a world order that will enable Eritrea to Africa to extricate itself from this marginalization. Above any other continent, Africa has more of an interest to work for achieving this mission. So I say this is not a coincidence. This is a natural solidarity or alliance coming because of the history that we have witnessed for centuries, where human beings, nations, and peoples have been suffering. We have to look for a new world order. That is the common goal that everybody has been trying to find an explanation, but ultimately it's one goal and one mission.
Well, I have to agree with you entirely about the historical context being so important, because even it's become very clear that the fall of the Soviet Union was not the end of history, and even the guy who popularized that quote said later on, years later, that he was wrong. And so this ideology, of course, continues. And in the context of the Russia-Africa summit, there were a lot of reports of Western powers trying to pressure African countries into not coming to this summit. I wanted to ask if you yourself ran into any of that, of these attempts by the West to pressure you, or then in general, for those that did receive some sort of pressure from the West, why would you think the West would try to stop them from participating in this summit?
It's a show of their weakness. Their ideology of not only containing Russia, but containing everyone who doesn't bow to this ideology has been there for the last 30 years. You will be punished if you are not in line with their way of thinking. It's either sanctions, it's either demonizing this or that guy, and using all sorts of tools, including the World Bank, IMF, and other tools they use to pressure everybody to bow to this ideology. And people are fed up of this behavior, this culture of domination, hegemony. Everybody is fed up of it. The people in Africa, above any other continent, would like to see this process going forward and changing their quality of life, not for this generation, but for the coming generation. So they would use every tool like they are using now Ukraine to give the impression that this is a fight between Russia and Ukraine. I said, this has nothing to do with Ukraine and Russia. This is their declared war that has been there for the last 30 years, and it's not only Russia. It's for everybody else, everywhere in Asia, in Latin America, Europe, the Americas. People are fed up of this thing, and when they try to pressure someone who doesn't bow to this ideology, it only emphasizes the fact that they are fed up. They are failed. Their mission have failed. Putting NATO in an intensive care and Europe in an intensive care is not going to work anymore, even with all the pressure and all the tools that they have in there are available at their disposal. So I say the success of this second summit of the Russia-Africa solidarity is a milestone, proving that their strategies are failing. Their tactics are no more impressing anyone, to at least for those who may have an interest in bowing or at least showing some sign of agreement with their ideology. That's no more valid now. And they will continue pressuring everybody so that they claim to be supported by populations in Africa. Nowhere in the continent will you find any one nation or people accepting to these pressures that are being imposed in spite of the marginalization that exists. And I think more than anyone else, Africa would reject any pressure from any side in the NATO alliance to come and make an event like this not happen anymore.
Well, that actually brings me to my next question. First of all, about cooperation between Eritrea and the Russian Federation in the sphere of defense. Because earlier this year, I read one of your statements where you said that the Tigray rebels were actually supported by the United States in the war that ended last year. So I wanted to ask you, to what extent do you think defense cooperation between Eritrea and the Russian Federation can make the region not only more stable in terms of combating terrorism, but also preventing Western-backed attempts at regime change or anything like that?
Yeah, it's been, I think, it's one of the tactics that's been used for generations, not only the last 30 years, but this has been a tactic, incite conflict and manage conflict. Incite conflict and go on managing this conflict everywhere. People are, as part of the lesson learned in history, we're fed up of this incitement of conflicts here and there to serve their hegemonistic strategy. And it's been, everyone knows very well why this sense of creating conflict at the level of the Horn of Africa, amongst peoples, amongst nations, among what you see now happening in the Sudan is one symptomatic thing of their involvement in creating ethnic, clan, tribal conflicts, and then fueling this conflict to serve their hegemonistic strategies. And people are saying we're no more to be fooled by these tactics coming from their side. And I think the lessons learned, the lessons that we're learning every day, prove that we're extricating ourselves from this state of hegemonistic management of conflicts here and there. And that's why Africa has become marginalized, because talk about famine, it's Africa becoming an example. Talk about conflicts, Africa becomes a pretext for everything. It's dehumanizing, and people will have to get out of this cycle, and they know very much. But in spite of the awareness that you see everywhere at the continental level, they continue to play this game. It's one of the tactics of hegemonizing and controlling and creating spheres of influence. You can only do that by inciting conflicts, ethnic, tribal, whatever.
As you were saying about how this this conflict that you could even say is a continuation of what was going on in the Cold War, of the West attempting to exert its ideology on the world. Obviously, in the 20th century, in the 19th century, throughout centuries, the West has exploited much of Africa's resources through the colonial period. And a lot of people still say that although Africa has gained political independence, it's still being economically exploited by the West. So would you say that this struggle is still going on against like neo-colonialism, as you could say? And how would that need to be won?
It's trendy. It's trendy. That's why I started by saying, let's look at it from a historical context. It's trendy. It's a pattern. It's a pattern of behavior. It's a cultural pattern for them to come up and change it. What difference does it make, whether it's slavery, colonialism, or hegemonistic? It's a matter of grabbing, controlling, and using all possible tools of achieving that. I call it a fantasy. It's a sickness. It's a cultural sickness for people to continue generations working on this matter. Colonize or even grab land in the Americas. Do we find indigenous people now? Indigenous people are exterminated, first and foremost. You will never find red Indians, or they would like to call them in the United States. They're not there because they were exterminated. Go to Australia and you see people exterminated. 9 million people were exterminated in the Congo, in Africa. It's grabbing land and exterminating populations. When you start doing something, let's say cotton plantation in the United States, they had to take slaves from Africa as cheap labor. Slavery was there, and the objective was very clear. Then it changed faces and become what people call colonialism. What is the difference between colonialism, slavery, extermination of indigenous people here and there? The goal is one and the same. And then comes this ideology of hegemony, containing this and containing that and creating problems here and there, conflicts here and there. It's the same tactic. It's the pattern, and the trend is obvious for everyone. Now, people have learned their lesson. They're working in solidarity to extricate themselves out of this cycle. It's a cycle. It continues, and happens. Yeah, names may change, tactics may change, but it's the same objective. And we're saying now, in the 21st century, we need to create the ground or prepare the ground for a new world order. We'll never continue to live like this. And I talk about Africa, but Asia, go there. It's the same thing. Looking for conflict between us and that nation. One people and another people. One ethnic group, another ethnic group. It's a repetition of slavery. George Floyd's history is nothing unique. I mean, how many people are enslaved in the Americas now? Whether they come from the South or whether they've been there for the last 2-3 centuries. The same thing going on in many parts of the world. So it's trendy. The pattern is the same. Tactics may change. The tools they use may change with times. But again, I say it's the same trend and the same ideology that we face. And the good thing now is the awareness that we see evolving everywhere, and the organization and the solidarity that is taking shape, like what we've seen the last 2 summits. Russia-Africa summit is not unique. It's part of the broader strategy where people of the world are saying we don't want to go on suffering from this sick ideology.
Well, one of the things that the Russian president mentioned, actually, at the Russia-Africa summit was that as the multipolar world continues to rise, Africa as a unit is going to grow into a great political and economic power on the world stage. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about how you think the emergence and the growth of this multipolar world is going to change the way Africa looks politically and economically. Would you say it would become more united, like maybe a Pan-African kind of idea, or how do you think it will change?
It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's developing consensus through consultations. These summits are mechanisms for consultation, exchanging ideas, sharing ideas, and articulating the objectives that will have to commonly be accepted. It's a very civilized way of developing consensus, discussing the challenge people here and there are facing this day. The challenge that they face from these hegemonistic forces are very clear to everyone. Now we can say we have developed a consensus on what the challenge for the generations to come will be here or there, and going beyond developing consensus. If we are agreed on creating a new world order for the benefit of generations to come, how can we do it? Africa with 1.2 billion people, now 1.2, maybe more people there, in a matter of one generation it will double. Are we preparing for change, for finding a better environment and making our contributions so that future generations will not suffer like what our forefathers have seen? Definitely, we'll have to find solutions for this problem. That's where you have to go into working out the details of the objectives. What are the goals and objectives economically, in a number of sectors, a number of industries? How can we possibly develop an infrastructure? How can we develop strategies for energy integration? How can we develop our resources so that we can achieve food security, not for now, but for a generation to come? How can we cooperate and create complementarity in each and every sector, in each and every industry? What are the resources that we have available? Africa, with not a population of 1.2 billion, but it says that Africa has more than 60% of global endowments. Everything is there: minerals, natural resources, manpower, and everything. It's underdeveloped. Definitely, it will have to find ways of making life better for generations to come. And this will not be happening within the continent, but the continent will have to work in solidarity. Russia has technology, Russia has resources, Russia has advantage in a number of areas. So bringing these resources to a level where ultimately you will multiply. It's a multiplier where synergy will create more of an opportunity, will create or come up with a solution for all these problems. We'll go for details. What are the sectors that we engage jointly to develop a strategy and make realizable plans by mobilizing available resources? The resources are there. We need to only create the architecture for integration and complementarity within sub-regions at the continental level, within Africa as a continent, among Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and Americas. It's an evolving process. So building consensus and going beyond consensus, identifying or even qualifying programs that will have to be implementable by mobilizing available resources, education, technology, all sorts of resources are being mobilized. And this second summit, everyone was coming with own ideas, but ultimately you find the similarities. Even the approaches are coming to take a pattern that defines the consensus that is being evolved. Even without people consulting each other, they are coming up with ideas. And finally, you say, what is the difference between what a president of one nation said and another president from another nation? they share the same experience, they have the same concerns, and ultimately they are working together to change things for better. I say this is a higher level of development at the Africa-Russia relationship, but you can go on and say what's happening every day, everywhere is confirming the fact that global awareness is growing. The details will be worked out. The third summit will have a higher level of organization, and we will talk about concrete programs, achievable programs. We will talk about the resources that are being mobilized to achieve these goals. So we're moving forward, as I see it, within the context. The context is always the same.
Well, I'd also like to ask you, I mean, your country has faced sanctions. The Russian Federation is now the most sanctioned country in the world. Even more sanctions are on Russia than even North Korea or Iran. And, you know, through the process of developing further cooperation with Russia, the African continent, they're going to have to find a way to basically get around these Western sanctions as much as possible. And there have been some discussion on how to do that. For example, using national currencies in international transactions, working through multinational organizations like the African Union. What kind of other strategies do you think can be developed to achieve that?
It's that one tool, example. I mean, we need to get out of this euro-dollar cycle. I mean, each and every sovereign nation will have to have its own monetary policies, and the monetary independence will have to be there. If global architecture of monetary system is controlled by these hegemonistic forces, definitely it is going to be a tool available to these guys to impose sanctions here and there. And we need to get out of that. And it's one of the sectors, one of the areas that global effort will have to find a solution. Africa, Latin America, Asia, Europe, name it. We need to have an architecture for a monetary system that makes nations and peoples enjoy from that system, a free system, an open system, not controlled by small groups that will ultimately use it as a tool for imposing sanctions. I mean, we need to get out of, I would say, dollar-euro cycle. And it's you can go back and see the financial breakdowns that we have witnessed. 2008, 2009 was there a financial crisis. The crisis is becoming cyclical. Why? Because of the control of these hegemonistic forces and trying to use that as a tool for manipulating economies here and there, putting pressure here and there, sanctions here and there. Now, we have learned our lesson. We need to get out of this cycle, but that's not the only tool that we need to facilitate cooperation amongst different the number of continents. We have to have a viable financial system, a viable monetary system that will enable economies to grow and finally create synergy by working together. Otherwise, one small group controlling these financial institutions or monetary tools to impose sanctions here and there is no more tenable. And we'll have to find a solution for that. And yeah, debts here and there, obstacles here and there, but ultimately designing a strategy or working on a strategy that will benefit everybody else and allow everybody to make his contributions in going forward is an imperative. It's an imperative that we have to work on seriously. And experts will have to come and find or design a structure that ultimately will extricate people of the world to liberate themselves from the domination of one small group controlling these institutions globally.
Well, Mr. President, it was really fascinating hearing your insight into all that. Those are all the questions I have. It was, again, I want to say thank you very much for giving us your time. And
I say RT will have to do his job, make people aware.
Yeah.
It's a mission for RT. It's a mission for every peace-loving, freedom-loving people, and we'll have to use any media outlet so that awareness grows, and the preparedness for the peoples and nations of the world will have to be part of this, and RT has a lot of responsibility on this matter, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Most welcome.
Completely agree with you.